Well, the world was changing, which she mentioned it has dramatically, and speeding up. The not-for-profit arts essentially stayed the same. The model that was created 60 years ago, around the time where I was getting up to walk across the room to change the channel, was essentially what it is today. You search out the most exciting art, the greatest artists you can find, the best new interesting work, then you desperately try and raise money to support that work and fill your houses, put people into seats, so that maybe at the end of the day or the end of the season you can just barely break even. And I think that what we now know is that although there are conscious of that model, we have to think about new ways to adapt our model, not change our model to deal with the challenges that we have.
Right. I think nonprofit organizations have been told by many business-minded people, oh, we'll run it like a business. And even most recently, those same people have said, well, with regards to ticketing, why don't you do it on a demand-based scale? And of course, we all know we've been running our nonprofit organizations like businesses for years, and we did the demand-based pricing long before the airlines made it popular. We know all of these things. We know how to run our organizations. The challenge now is how to go from just surviving, but really thriving in this new world, in this new time. And I think that we'll discuss a lot today that really the key is to not just present these performances, but to create these experiences for our audiences.
Yeah, and what we all know is that your potential audiences and your donors are being bombarded with stimuli at home, at work, in their cars, as they walk down the street, even in your lobbies and your theaters. They're still with handheld devices. So to try and get through to them is more challenging than ever before. And what's interesting to me is that there really have only ever been two areas in this not-for-profit arts model. One is, of course, finding great art and presenting great art, and the other is development. And when we talk about development, it's developing everything. It's developing new work. It's developing audiences, developing now young audiences, developing your niche, developing your brand, and developing money developing, fund development. So all of those are involved. So what we're going to do this morning is to talk about these kinds of things, and we're going to integrate in the conversation many of those subjects that you mentioned or those challenges that you have.
Absolutely.
So first of all, what you might have seen on your handout, which is every so often we've got these little watchwords. In the 21st century, cultural arts organizations must be reinvented to become centers for the arts, culture, and community. Question for all of you. How many of you have theaters and/or lobbies that you rent, that you own, that you use, that essentially are kind of dark during the day until hour before the house opens before performance time? Not so many. Now, does that mean the rest of you have spaces that are animated and energized and being used all the rest of the day in addition to performance? How many for whom is that the case? So the others, and the others are, okay, needing more caffeine. So anyway, let me tell you one of the experiences that I had that is really key to what you're doing and what you need to do. When I arrived in Portland, John mentioned that for a period I kind of finished my management company time and decided that I would go back to running organizations like all of you do, because I missed that. So I arrived in Portland. I became the executive director of Portland Center Stage. And this was the major theater company in Portland, Oregon. And they were at a very exciting time because they were moving into, or just had moved into, a new venue, a fabulous venue. It was and still is the only building in America that is on the National Register of Historic Places and has a LEED Platinum rating from the United States Green Building Council. So what that meant was, it was this beautiful marriage of an 1896 armory with this incredible contemporary exterior. They took a 22,000 square foot building, a block or a portion of a block, and essentially made it into a 55,000 square foot building by inserting floors on different levels. It's magnificent. And the reason I mention that is part of the concept at that time was to create a space that wasn't just a theater. Because what they knew already is, we will never build theaters like we used to again. We have to change because the world has changed. So they built a space that people could literally be in almost 27. And the way it worked out was just really just stunning and striking to us. So it was in the middle of a cool area of town. It had a cafe, it had art exhibits, it had meeting spaces, it had places for Tai Chi classes and yoga classes. So literally you could arrive at 6 in the morning and there would be life and community. And probably some of us left some nights or mornings at 1 in the morning, and the last of the people were filtering out. So only for 5 hours a day was it empty. So what that meant is you had an entire community converging on this space, and it became like home for these people. So very different than our old model of a theater that opens at 7 o'clock and the lights go on and we close at 10:30 and everybody goes home. What's also interesting to me is soon after I got there, the world collapsed. We all remember it, unfortunately. And so the challenges became enormous as we remember. Although the first thing that happened, everybody remembers, people stopped buying tickets. People were frozen with their assets. How can I give money? I just watched my whole portfolio drop. So it was a hugely challenging time. What I observed over the next 2 years was the major companies in Portland, Oregon, symphony, opera, ballet, theater, all had these challenges. And the one that was able to do the best with it all was the one that had this kind of a home. The others that were renting a concert hall that was kind of old or using an auditorium that was kind of challenging, they had very different situations. And I said to people as we were going through this time, doing what everyone else did, desperately trying to raise money and convince people to buy tickets, if this theater company had not made the choice to move into this new home instead of renting a little theater that they had across town in a center, I don't think we would have made it, no matter how good any of us were. So it was a huge, huge illustration of home and what it's about to have a home. And if you can, even if it's not your own home, to try and fill the space with human interaction during the day, so you build your family.
Right, so working at San Francisco Ballet and now the work that I do at Berkeley Symphony, we don't have necessarily these extraordinary venues to work with. So the focus that I sort of brought to the teams that I worked with is how to work with what we have. In the War Memorial Opera House in San Francisco, which I'm sure many of you have seen at some point or another or heard about, it's a beautiful old venue, but there's not a lot going on there during the day. It's closed completely. And at Berkeley Symphony, we operate in Zellerbach Hall, which is on the UC Berkeley campus. And again, it's a sort of an older building with not a lot going on. So the focus that we brought when we were doing our performances and trying to bring in audiences and sort of build a community, not just who was coming in the door with a ticket, seeing the performance and leaving, was to create more events and activities prior and after the performances that we had. So at San Francisco Ballet, we created the Prosecco Promenade, where we had donated Prosecco, opened a few hours early. Everyone who came through the door got a glass, and it suddenly became this sort of fun, glamorous evening that was no additional cost to them. And suddenly they said, "Oh, hey, this is great. This is more of an evening than just going and seeing a show. It's really, you know, I'm mingling. This is a social thing as well." And people loved that. So people kept coming back. People from my generation who probably would not typically have done that thought, "Oh, well, hey, this is sort of cool." And same thing at Berkeley Symphony. You know, we brought in floral arrangements and linens and tables. None of us, you know, costed that much, but people were suddenly excited to have something more than just the performance they were going to. They had an experience. They had a whole evening planned for them when they were coming in and leaving the theaters that we were working in. So it definitely, I think, makes a huge difference to build your community, not just to build your audience.
It was the analogy that I'm thinking of as Susan was talking last night. You know, we all here to try and justify our work, you know, economic development. Isn't that a wonderful reason to support the arts? And those of us who have lived our lives in the arts and care passionately about it, frankly, the most important thing is art. It's about the art. I mean, the fact that there's economic development, that's great, that's wonderful, but you know what, it's about the art. And in the same way, I think that the analogy I'm pointing out is for a lot of us, the performance would be enough. You go in and see somebody who takes your breath away and moves you to tears and laughter, it's plenty. You don't need any more than that. But the audiences are not us, they're different from us. And so that's why for them we have to create experiences. How many of you are in markets that have competing, I won't say competing, but there are numbers of offerings in wherever you are, in addition to yours? A lot, okay. So here's the next thing that we've learned. That what we do has to become about creating a narrative, about a story. And one of the things that we also learned with a theater company we were working with, we did some research, some market research. we learned, some of us over the years, that you are most likely, we thought, and we always believed, and we thought the research told us, to go to live performance if you go to live performance. So what does that mean? That means, okay, if you decide to start going to the ballet and you really like it, you'll probably go to the opera. And then maybe you'll go to the musical theater company. Well, interestingly, we did this research and found out that's not really always the case. So who was the biggest audience and who was our potential audience for the theater company? They were people who went to the movies and people who frequented bookstores and read books. So all of a sudden it was like, oh, I get it. It's about storytelling. People like stories. And this is sort of another basic thing from the beginning of time. What did people do for recreation? They told stories and they shared stories, which is what development is about, which is what all of what we do is about. So we started focusing on this whole idea of narrative and storytelling. And it's critically important that you create a narrative around your work. Now, some of you are presenting genres that are easy. If it's theater, there is a story. A theater production typically has a beginning and a middle and the end, and it's telling a story. It's a little more challenging if you're doing ballet. There's a story, but not as much maybe. And what about classical music and chamber music? Again, for some of us, there's a story, but for a lot of people, no story. It's like, what's going on here? So, is to create a story. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. Obviously, you can try and say to people, here's the story. As Marissa said, the symphony, like all of us have done, we have these pre-conference conversations where the music director talks about the work and lets you know what's going to happen. And when the sound goes like this, what it means is this, and it's actually this story. And then afterwards, we bring the artists out on the stage and they tell us more. And so it becomes a little bit of a story. But beyond that, we're talking about really creating a narrative, not just within the work itself, but outside of the work. I was flying yesterday from the West Coast, and I was reading the Sunday New York Times, and two things sort of jumped out at me. One was, so this is the new brochure from what is America's 4th or 5th largest repertory theater company. Nice brochure, the usual 7 performances and, some premieres and some old work and classics and so forth. But the coolest thing was on the back. They have this one page that says interact. And they say, don't just sit there. And what these are prologues before as previews, audience exchanges, theater in the couch, bike to theater night, LGBT night, playtime, out with ACT, wine drinking. So there's all of these, numerous activities where they've essentially extended the experience in the theater and made it like filled with activities. And I know some of you are sitting there looking at me like going, don't we have enough to do without like creating, an entire day and night experience? You do, but it's just the times we're living in. The other thing that I'm always struck by, the New York Times travel section, Sunday, probably one of the most well-done, most read travel sections in the world. And have you ever noticed that when they go to tell you about somewhere, someplace, every week they pick another place. This one was about Oslo, Norway. They don't just say Oslo, Norway. These are the things to see. These are the places to stay. These are the good restaurants. It's 36 hours. So they literally create a story. They take you from when you arrive on Friday, and here's the entire narrative of what you'll do through the whole time there. So again, I think it's just another reminder that it's so much about storytelling. The next thing that you focused on in a lot of your emails, and of course we focused on as well, is attracting and including the elusive younger audiences that everyone wants and needs and requires a much more thoughtful, strategic, long-term plan. We're all dealing with this. And luckily, I get to hang out with somebody from the younger audience. But she's not exactly typical, but she can tell you a little bit about her friends and what we need to do to get them, because we need them.
Right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, and as everyone knows today, my generation, everyone today is inundated with all of these choices and experiences, different things to do. My generation in particular has grown up with this and is used to it and is saturated with it, whether it's shampoo or toothpaste, these things, we're overwhelmed by it. And these days with social media, every night there's a show, there's an art gallery opening, there's this, there's that. So how can you recruit my generation when we're saturated with all of these other companies, organizations, performances, everything that's happening that's trying to get me there as well? So I would say to you that there are 3 sort of basic strategies that you can use to recruit my generation to come to your audiences. The first one I would suggest is to get an ambassador from that generation. It is so essential and will prove so helpful for you in bringing in these audiences. The majority of audiences at all of our venues is generally older, but I guarantee that there are a few younger people from your community that come to your organizations and love what you do, whether they've seen a brilliant ballet performance and it resonates because they used to dance, or they saw an opera that they just thought the music was so beautiful. They've all had experiences that they've been really wowed by. And the trick is to find that person and to cultivate them. So whether it's searching through your patron data or speaking with other staff or other audience members about who do you know who's of the younger generations that have come to this theater and really loved it. And you find that person and you work with them to get their friends there. Another thing I will tell you about my generation is that it's always very cool if you can discover something that no one else has. There are so many things that we're inundated with, and if you can suddenly say, hey, look, I know that we spend all this time going out to eat and going to a bar, going to art, things like that. I bet that you guys have never been to this venue, this performing arts center, or seen this type of show, whether it's theater, ballet, something like that. If you can suddenly say that and bring your friends and show them something that many of them probably have never seen before or were exposed to when they were younger, but it didn't particularly resonate with them, if you can get that one person to then bring their friends in and build a group around it, it's going to be a really successful tool in building those audiences. A popular thing that we use both at Berkeley Symphony, San Francisco Ballet, is Young Professionals Group. Sort of building an experience for these people, whether it's discounted tickets, receptions, things that will sort of bring them in, targeting their demographic, and building, again, these sort of evenings and experiences around your performances that to them will be exciting and will sort of stand out against the other activities that they have to choose from on a day-to-day basis. So that's sort of the key thing that you can work on with them. The second thing, of course, is sort of creating the experience, building a reception or some sort of themed evening, whether it's having musicians, someone come to speak with you, something sort of exciting specifically for that group. And the third thing, of course, is the narrative. I think, unfortunately, I'm in the minority when it comes to those who have been exposed to the arts from a young age. I would say that probably a few friends of mine have really grown up with the arts as well. Others of them weren't so fortunate to go to the ballet and the theater, those things from a very young age. And because of that experience, I have an understanding that a lot of people don't. And I think particularly when it comes to my generation, building that story and having relatable, interesting parts of those stories is really, really key in bringing in those audiences. So
the other thing that I'm sort of wondering that comes up, and it was mentioned in an email or two, how many of you have found, and we're going to take your questions in 1 second.
Actually, this isn't a question.
Oh.
Can we close the blinds behind you guys?
Yeah.
Sure.
It's really hard to see. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that. We always prefer to have better lighting. How's that? Is that better?
Better?
Great. And just a little more with the pink special for me, okay? How many of you, as I was asking, have found it difficult or challenging to find young professionals to bring into your workforce? For those who have staffs that are looking, some, yeah. You should relate your story. As Marissa said, she grew up in a sort of atypical situation, but she didn't set out in spite of all of the incredible artists that I like to think that I introduced her to in all of her time. I will just, before she tells you, I'll just tell you that somebody said, so your kids are kind of, apples don't fall far from the tree. Her brother is in Los Angeles, he's making movies, major motion pictures. He's just finished one, he's working on another, he's making his way up. It's incredible. And she obviously is in the arts. I actually didn't, although I exposed them to it, I sort of thought, I don't know if the not-for-profit arts is really a way that you can make a good living in DX. So I can't say that I led them there, but the reason that they're there in some ways is that many years ago, there was this Take Your Children to Work Day. It used to be Take Your Daughters to Work Day, and then it became Take Your Children in a more politically correct time. And, so, when you'd ask the kids later on, it's like, well, how come you're doing what you're doing? Once in a while, or at some point, they would say, well, we went to Mom's office, and she was an attorney, and, there were a few women kind of sitting there working at computers, and then somebody came in and talked to Mom, and, that was cool. And then we went to Dad's office, and, Neil Simon had just left, and then Julia Child showed up, and then, then Mel Brooks was there, and then, then Judith Jameson from Alvin Ailey came, and then, it was like, okay. Anyway.
Yeah, well, certainly that, I think, resonated with me. And I think beyond just, the cool experiences and the exposure, there was, again, that sense of community. So every time I walked in that theater, it was like I knew everyone and the audience members. There was sort of that sense where it felt like home to me. There were other offices, whether it was my mom's office, other, parents, uncles, aunts I visited. It was a little mundane, a little sterile. This was cool, and I knew these people, and it was exciting. So I think when I graduated college, part of that resonated with me, and I was offered a job at the Sausalito Arts Festival, which is an outdoor arts festival, the largest in the country, just doing their coordination. I had interned with them previously. They offered me a job. It was a time when I wasn't in a position to turn down a job fresh out of college when the job market was not so good, so I said, sure, I'll take it. And I fell back into, again, this arts organization where there was such this community around it, and I loved it, and I felt at home very, very quickly. And that was a contract position, so at the end of that, it was, okay, what to do now? There's all these things, all these choices, all these different paths I could take, and that sort of just stuck within me, I think, because the people I sought out for my informational interviews were all people in the arts. It was just, the connections I had, and I sort of built on that. And that sort of process led me to San Francisco Ballet, where, again, I had that same fantastic experience of working with world-class dancers, world-class choreographers, all of these really exciting, interesting people, when my friends who were working at, Salesforce and all of the big companies in Silicon Valley had exciting things, but nothing that compared to the sort of out-of-the-ordinary experiences that I was having. And then after my time there, I was recruited to help Berkeley Symphony, where I am now. And during that same time, I sort of went through interview process and was offered jobs at LinkedIn and Google, and people now think I'm crazy for turning them down, particularly, where I am in the non-for-profit arts. When you think about the money you can make and the perks and all of those things, it doesn't quite compute, and people have a hard time understanding it. But again, it's sort of the community. And so Renee Mandel, the executive director at Berkeley Symphony, said, we're sort of in this very difficult time. We really need to raise a lot of money in this next year. Can you come help us out? And I thought, well, I think you're sort of crazy, because I have not raised a ton of money at San Francisco Ballet. I was more focused on donor cultivation and event planning specifically. So this was not necessarily a field where I had a lot of expertise. And it's a really unique and exciting art form that I wanted to explore more of and get more hands-on experience working in sort of the fundraising and behind the scenes of that organization. So that's sort of what landed me there for the year. And of course now we've raised quite a lot of money, gotten us back into a surplus as opposed to the deficit. And it continues on that pattern of both feeling good about the work that I'm doing because I'm making these positive contributions to a community that's desperately in need of these arts and these contributions that are coming from these organizations. And again, back to these cool experiences that I'm having, and just knowing that my work is unlike any other.
There's a sort of a secret that you all need to know, and that is that. Well, let me preface this by saying, am I correct in assuming that some, if not hopefully most of you, within your organizations need to raise some money to subsidize the work? Okay, nobody's just like making it on filling your houses and okay. That's, I thought maybe.
He couldn't come.
Yeah. He didn't mean to come, right? It's all right, he's busy. He's on a vacation somewhere. One of the secrets that I've learned, and I learned this years ago, and I started doing it years ago, and it has really paid off, is to find these young, bright people who may not even be in our line of work, and mentor them and train them, and let them go. By that I mean give them rope. What's interesting to me is that if you haven't heard this statistic, or maybe you know this, who knows what is the average tenure of a development director in America in the not-for-profit world?
18 months.
Exactly, she studied. Thank you. So what's the... Yeah, exactly. So everybody gets the downside of that. You know, the position that is probably most critical to stay for a long time and develop relationships, because people give money to people, as we always hear, is the position that's changing almost the fastest. It's like totally wrong. It's causing the greatest problems in our entire industry. And why does it happen? It happens because people who don't have training in development make decisions based on resumes and some interviews who they think would be best equipped to do development. They hire the person and it's not really the right person, and that person struggles for a while, and when things start to go south and it's clearly not, they let them go and they do it again. And this is a never-ending downhill cycle. So what I have been working with organizations to do to break this cycle is I said, don't do that anymore. I said, every one of you, and I will prove this if you ever want to give me the chance, every one of you within your organization has somebody who has the gift. And by the gift, I mean, everybody's born with gifts. I have this theory that, you can work very hard at something and get very good, but you can never be great. I could really play the violin really well and really work hard. I'm very musical. I have training, I have a degree, but I will never sound like Joshua Bell. I don't have that gift. Interestingly, development, I think, is also kind of a gift that you're born with. So there are some people that could work very hard at it, these people who last for 18 months, but they just will never really be great. So the key is to find someone in your organization, in your world, who actually has got it. So what Rene Mandel did, to his credit, this is a guy, please, this is turn off the recording, not seriously, but off the record, didn't have a lot of experience as an executive director. He's a very brilliant artist, great violinist. He worked with Berkeley some, artistic administration, went to Montreal Symphony, decided to return, offered this job as exec, didn't have a lot of experience. He didn't know any better than to say, you know what? Marissa, she's available, she's looking for something else, she's fantastic, let's get her. Anybody else would have said, she was a special events associate. You're going to move her up past development associate, development manager, assistant development director, and give her a development director job? And you know what? He did the perfect thing. She blew them away. 2.5 months before the end of their fiscal year, they not only exceeded their budget for the whole year, they raised more money than any year in the 45-year history. Now that's a proud father speaking, but also somebody who didn't just see her do this. I have watched young people do this for years. The double advantage is you get these young people in there, they light up your older donors, they light up everybody, and then they bring their friends, because they're there. So, I mean, this is just something that we've got to do more of, because it's a way to correct things. The other thing is that I will tell you that I was working with one of the associations. You're a member of the PAE, this is another one. Because they've asked us to do some development work for them. And I was having a conversation with the executive director. And we started to go down this path, and I started talking about, development. And this whole notion of what I just mentioned to you. And he said, well, Greg, that's really, our mission is really about convening presenters and managers and really focusing on the art and artists and how to increase your curatorial vision and refine that and so forth. And I said, wait, the world has changed. In the old days, the early years of this not-for-profit arts model, some of us came up as ushers, and we became house managers, and then we became box office managers, and then we became assistant marketing directors, and we moved up. We came from an operations track, we came from maybe a marketing track, or maybe an arts track. We were artists, and then we got the opportunity to choose other artists. Now, it's not going to be that way anymore. People who are choosing, and organizations who are choosing executive directors, by and large, are choosing those who can fundraise, those who understand and can do development, because it's so critically important. In the old days, you didn't need to raise the kind of money. The other thing that's happening is this was an American phenomenon for many years. Now it's worldwide. So Europe, after the economy collapsed, the state funding concept that we were always so envious of has changed. So now they too, in Europe and other parts of the world, have to learn this whole notion about development and individual donors, and what do we do with that, and how do we do it? So anyway, I relate this because it's related. This notion of young professionals, identifying young professionals who you think they have the gift, or get somebody to help you identify them. We do this all the time. We walk into an organization that's about to do a search for a development director. We meet everybody in the organization. At the end of the day, we walk outside with the executive director and the chair of the board, and you say, you know what? she's got it. We could work with her. And they said, what do you mean? We said, trust us. You just got to trust us. She's got that incredible charisma, that engaging personality, the people skills. 3 months, we'll train her. It's textbook. And it happens, and it works. So I just tell you that that's important to know, because those are the people, you bring those young people in, you train them, you move them up through your organization, and they will someday take care of the crisis that we hear about leadership in arts in America, where when we all retire, well, there'll be nobody to replace us. And I think that's something that we have to deal with. So anyway, that's maybe a little bit more than you needed on that, but it's all, as I say, sort of related. Before we go to questions, let's move quickly through this whole notion of experiencing the extraordinary.
Sure.
And what we mean by that. What do we mean by that? As if you don't know. So the other thing that you hear from us, and we see a lot and we write a lot, is that commissioning, presenting, and producing the most exciting work possible in various venues is dependent on development. I think we've sort of addressed that. The best way to be able to underwrite somebody who you can't afford in your size venue is to get an underwriter. The best way to bring in an emerging artist who you know is only going to sell half the seats in your house is to get an underwriter. So, we just can't really continue to either encourage emerging artists or encourage established artists to do new work and new projects unless we get them underwritten. So that's sort of basic and key. What were you going to relate about the communications thing, or did you cover it?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll
go ahead.
talk about that.
Okay.
So another thing that we've sort of seen to be a common thing in arts organizations is sort of the lack of knowledge of the mission and sort of community gathering within the staff towards that mission of the organization. At large organizations that I've worked with and worked at, the marketing department, we have so much to do. We can't help you guys with your campaign that you want to run for your gala that you're having. We can't do it. It's too much. They forget that at the end of the day, having the community, having the audiences come, having the donors come and pay money, it helps the entire organization. It helps the marketing team to get a grant for someone who can now do your social media. If we've found that donor or grant approved through the development side, all of these different departments in these organizations need to work together to really have a successful time. I actually, obviously didn't set out to work in the arts, as we covered already. I was a communications major. I studied marketing and public relations, and I loved that. So when I started at San Francisco Ballet, I'd found that I enjoyed these people in the marketing department, even though I was in the development department. Said, hey, why don't we work together? I sort of got chummy with them. And it worked to my benefit because we built these great relationships where they were supporting me in my efforts to engage donors and publicize events, and I was able to help them, like I mentioned, fundraise so that we could support new efforts in social media that they were doing to build new audiences. So I think the thing in all of this is reminding every single employee at your organization, large or small, that the overall goal of your organization is to keep that support, keep that audience, keep that momentum within your community. And if every single employee is not on board with that, it's not really going to work for you because everyone really has to work together. So that's just sort of something that I've learned along the way that I think people tend to forget because you focus on the day-to-day and you've got your budgets and your this and your that, but at the end of the day, the bottom line comes through how successful your organization as a whole is and can be.
The importance of ambassadors, and this is a concept that, again, we have seen it work so well. Find some young people, bring them to the theater, they get excited, say to them, listen, we'll give you a dozen tickets if you'll give them to individual friends, only once, and after that, they have to buy, and we've watched this go on and on. One of I think what we're learning in our time is that we've kind of confused the tools, the technology, with the method. The means sometimes has gotten confused with the end. And by that I mean that we have extraordinary technology. And clearly, those of you who understand branding and marketing and communications, to have all of the social media to work with, in addition to our old-fashioned print media and collateral pieces. And if you put it all together and combine it, we've seen brilliant efforts made to kind of get through all of the noise. It used to be in the old days, we would say, you may have heard this, how many impressions does someone have to have or see before they will be moved to purchase? And it was 5. You had to see an ad in a paper. You had to maybe read somebody's press release. You had to hear somebody mention something, 5. I will bet that the 5 has tripled today. and you have to have so many more impressions, but there is a way to cut through the impressions, and ironically, it's the old-fashioned way. It's getting a human being to tell another human being, and that is the greatest likelihood that you will get a person into your house. So the more human beings that you can have telling other human beings, the better. The other thing is that, this afternoon we'll talk a little bit about, development and really more about the world of development and how to do better and more. But what's interesting to me is that for years we've heard people say in the development world, people give money to people. I've watched the same thing happen with the sort of ticketing side. If John Ellis in Asheville develops friendships and relationships with people in his community, those are people that don't necessarily want to hear that Broadway artist he's presenting. That's not their first choice or the genre that they choose, but they have a relationship with him, and so they come to his theater. And we've seen this with every theater staff, truly, with box office managers, with ushers. When they tell a human being, the human being, it's like it cuts through all the noise, and the human being goes, really? And of course, this is like old school, preaching to the choir here. I mean, of course, word of mouth is the greatest thing, but it's like we forgot that. It's like we're doing everything else because we have these incredible technology tools, and we forgot that they are all adding to the 5 or 10 or 15 impressions, but they're not ultimately going to be the one that brings people into the house. So that's so critically important. So before we take your questions, just one thing I'll leave you with. See, that was my cue. There are futurists who have said before now that this is what will happen in the early 20th century, that the technology will evolve such that human beings will be able to create their own individual pods. And in their pods, they will have high definition, surround sound, streaming, theatrical situations in their very homes. They'll have spas outside on the deck in the back. They'll have incredible refrigerators and grills and food. And they will get to a place where they say, there is no need to leave here. I have got it all right here. I can experience everything and anything. Sound a little familiar? So then what will happen is, after a number of years have gone on and people are truly holed up in all of their pods and their silos, somebody, for some reason, probably because someone reached out to them and said, I want you to come check this out, will venture out, back out to a live theater, and will sit down for the first time after having been alone for so long amongst people who are breathing together and sighing together and wiping tears away together and laughing together. And at the end of the experience, after this thunderous standing ovation where this person is moved to stand up and clap with the rest, he or she will return home to their pod and go online and say, I experienced something tonight I have never experienced before. There were human beings with me, live. It was amazing. So I tell you that because that really reinforces where we're headed. And you can lead us back to where the futurists say we're going by being mindful of that and reminded of that. Okay? So now, because we've gone on much longer than we intend to do, because we are people who said we prefer conversation to presentation, we would love to answer some questions in however much time we have left in this mini session. Where are we? Do we see we did better than we thought? Okay, so let me just, so now I'm going to level with you. So, did I already mention the board meeting presentation earlier? Did I say that? Sorry, it's the jet lag. Oh, okay. So last week we were asked to present to a theater company's board that they wanted us to consider running their capital campaign. And we were given about 40 minutes. And, we had a fair amount of information to impart. And Marissa and I said ahead of time, okay, so listen, we'll just, we'll run through this, and then, we'll be able to spend half the time just in conversation, taking questions. And we got to like 33 minutes, and finally okay, are there any questions? And had so little time for questions. And we walked out of there and went, 40 minutes, that was like a minute, So 90 minutes, that'll be like 2 minutes. So anyway, we probably speeded up to, but hopefully that's a good thing, and we get to more conversation. So ask what you can about anything, related to anything we've mentioned this morning, and let's see if we can help increase the success in the room. Please.
One idea, and I'd like to hear Marissa's response. Really, is one idea is that floats out there now is that young people that many of us who have transitioned beyond being young and have kids, and at different stages you're looking for different things. And so a PAC experience, sit down, listening room type of experience may resonate with you at a certain point in your life, and that we really shouldn't be that concerned about heavily recruiting, spending tons of resources towards this college age buyer. And I kind of want to hear your response to that, because what I'm hearing is that it's got to be cool, it's got to be social. Well, that's the bar scene. That's what's happening there when you go out with a bunch of friends and you're talking. You may hear the music in the background, but maybe that's not the original intent of that experience. Is really, if it's social, then it's social. But PAC experiences are often with their artist, and just maybe to get your feedback on how to kind of level with those two different ideas of that experience for that particular age group, kind of that college age transitioning from high school into adulthood.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's I think a hot topic, certainly, and something that lots of people have lots of opinions on. But what I will say is the social component is really, I talked about it that much because it's to get people to the theater. It's to get people to your organizations so that they can have that experience of sitting in a theater and then experiencing that. I think, a big topic in California, and of course across the country, we were actually talking about it at dinner last night, is cuts to arts education and how these things are impacting our communities. We were fortunate, my generation still, to have this level of education, but it is quickly going away and people are quickly forgetting about what it's like to experience a theater. Sitting in a theater and hearing music, hearing different sounds, seeing the dance, all of that. That is an experience that's not being replicated for this younger generation, I think, as commonly as it should. And my fear, quite frankly, for our generation is that that's just going to be completely forgotten. So I guess what I would say is that the social component gets you to the theater so that you can ensure that my generation is still having those experiences, because truly, it can't be replicated. I mean, we all know, we've all sat in theaters, we've all sat in these venues, concerts, everything, where you see something that is so amazing that you can't possibly find looking up videos on YouTube. It's just not quite the same. So for my generation to experience that, of course it takes these social components and telling your friends and social media to get them there so that they can be at a point where they can experience this extraordinary thing and then go on from there.
Yeah, I was just finished to sort of finish the answer. I was working with another organization, and their question was kind of similar. It's like, well, why should we invest the time and the resources in getting these young people there? Because very quickly they're going to go have children, and then we all know once they have children, they'll get busy, and it'll all be about soccer games and don't have babysitters, and we essentially will lose them then. But what was interesting is when we did studies, if we could get them addicted a little bit before they had their kids, they wouldn't forget it. And then truly they would do a little bit. They get babysitters, they do a little bit while their kids are growing up, but you had to just know, okay, they weren't going to be doing a lot during that period. But as soon as they were empty nesters again, because they had been previously addicted and we put the resources into getting them, they would come back big time. And then they became our biggest subscribers, our biggest donors, and so forth. So it's that same thing we used to hear, if you don't give them arts education, they don't fall for it. If you don't go after those college kids and young 20-somethings before they have their kids, you can't get them. It's just so much tougher to get them back. So I think it's a justifiable resource, but it's like long-range plan. It's like we'll invest this now and it'll come back to us years from now. But if you keep doing it, they're all cycling. Yes.
I think one of the biggest problems we have in arts education, at least from my perspective, is that in our state, North Carolina, the opportunity is given to a lot of elementary school children, and maybe we do some programs in the middle school. High school, it stops. Up north, when I was working with Maryland and Pennsylvania and Virginia, they carry programs through high school. So the kids are constantly enriched with this. And then when they get to college, if you're lucky, if some fine art schools have a program where the kids can still experience that, but usually they either have to pay a couple dollars, whatever. And if they have a chance, they're gonna take their couple of dollars and go for beer.
Yeah.
Cup of coffee, yes. So I think I don't know how you can look into this or how you can even, maybe somebody here could be able to explain it to me, why we stopped in this state. Because it used to go on. They used to have arts education in high school. Why has it stopped?
So let me ask you all, do you sense that there is more arts education in North Carolina in elementary and middle than high school?
Oh,
Definitely. Okay. And do you sense that it kind of fades away in high school? So are there companies, are any of your organizations then picking up the slack and saying, okay, knowing that, what we have to do is we've got to ensure that we have a program to put high school kids into our seats. Because they did get a little bit addicted to it and learned a little bit when they were in those younger classes. And now they're going to get very busy, but same thing, if we could just like get them to come to an occasional play or an occasional performance, is that part?
I was just going to say, Patrice, at least from my experience, my challenge with high school is their schedules. And it's really difficult to get the central office to be able to coordinate something with you because of their schedules for the students, trying to get them there. I agree, it is still extremely important to keep them engaged. When we had the partnership with DBR, it was high school, and it was amazing how moved they were, because they do get some of that experience in elementary, a little still sprinkled in junior high, but it just dies off. And so to see them to just be reminded was wonderful. So for at least for me, a big challenge is their schedules. Sometimes it meant, like for the DVR experience, it meant taking that entertainment to them at their school. And I hate to do that because I want them to be part of my venue. But at least, I mean, we did both. I mean, we took the entertainment there and then had an event that night to invite them to remind them that the experience that you're going to get in the theater is so much more moving than you're going to get, even in your gymnasium. So it was a little bit of both, and I think it's a challenge, and it's a consistent relationship with your schools, and it's just ongoing, but it is important.
In some parts of the country, we're hearing that there's pushback. I mean, this is everywhere. Everybody's too overprogrammed, and so we hear even in the school day to get the teachers to give up time to let there be an assembly, whether it's you come to them or bring them to you. So then, and then what about after school? Well, they have sports and they have rehearsals and so forth. So I mean, clearly, the demands we're putting on our children's time is also gotten out of hand. But again, I think, are there many of you that are either bringing something, even a single artist who's visiting, to a high school, or inviting high school students to your venues? Some.
We do that. And I was going to say, too, I think the deal is that in terms of arts education, it's mandatory when they're in elementary and younger, but in high school, it exists. There are art classes, there's drama classes, there's music classes, but it's an elective sort of thing. But I don't have a venue, I'm a festival producer, but we do bring artists into the schools, and the budgets that you're discussing, they are being cut. Like, they still have a cultural arts budget, but it definitely is cut. So when we offer to bring them an artist for free to come in and do, we've never been turned down, whether it was a jazz residency or a visual art residency, or you can always find somebody who wants it. But
So you're not finding the time in the school day thing is an issue particularly?
no, you just have to find the right teacher.
Yeah.
And generally what we do is we go into the arts magnets where you already are going to have a good
Right.
commitment to
Right.
what you're doing.
Yeah, some people talk about, having a personal relationship with the physics teacher, and then you've got a guy who's doing a one-person show that's about the life of, a physicist, and, and trying to sort of literally do it that way. Are there others that have kind of found ways to either get into the high school classrooms or get the high school kids to come?
Well, from the agency point of view, sometimes with our artists, especially with the high schools, we work with kids at risk. So if we have somebody that a theater is producing, they say they want to bring, we always say we want to do outreach. Well, let's say, well, what will you do? We can't do it all. And sometimes I'll get in touch with the chancellor, or we'll look at if it's LGBT stuff or substance abuse issues or things like that. Is we look at those groups that are kids at risk, because they're the ones who are really eager to find an alternative for those teachers. And sometimes we'll have the artists go to these secondary schools that are in the pods to themselves, because these were quote unquote the bad kids. But again, when we've done that, we've changed the show, but we let them talk because these kids want to talk, so they want to be heard. So we change things around, and then what invariably happens is that they tell their parents or something, and then we've had more people show up at night. So it's a much more difficult partnership, but the commitment as far as facilitating change has to be a commitment from the artist as well as just from, let's say, the agent who wants to sell the show. So that's how we've managed to make it work.
Chris Berkeley Symphony program with high school kids, and I did one in Portland.
Yeah, and I think, it was similar to the experiences that everyone's talked about. There's, just was one opening. At Berkeley Symphony, we have music in the schools, which is exactly as you've all outlined. It was elementary and middle school education, and it drops off in high school. In this past year, we said, we've got to get to those high school kids. Actually, we were producing a luncheon where we were doing fundraising, and we said, all right, why don't we have some high school students come and play? And it was sad to realize that there were so few high school students that had been involved in those early programs who were still participating. So we said, all right, well, this has to change. So we did exactly, we brought one performance into the high school because that's really the only time that the school could afford. And for everyone who had participated in the music education programs in elementary and middle school, whether or not they were still playing music, it very quickly brought them back to what they had learned, and it left them sort of wanting more. And from that just one performance that we had in the schools, we were fortunate to get an amazing response of teachers and parents of those students saying, how can we work with you to build now a program for our high school students, because that one performance left them wanting more. And I think that was sort of a fortunate case. It's clearly not that easy because of scheduling and because of just loss of interest, but I think if you can just bring that one interaction back to people in high school, it'll really sort of just be a quick little reminder. I took piano lessons growing up until I was in middle school or so, and again, dropped off in high school. But I saw a performance when I was at college of this amazing pianist, and I said, hey, that's it, I gotta get back to this. I signed myself up for a piano class and took the initiative myself. So I'm hopeful that that can happen with more students as they continue to receive these interactions.
Here and then over here.
I'd like to address a program that we do at the Cabarrus Arts Council. We bring a professional performance for every grade, K through 12, every year. We've been doing this since 2000. I'm going to say about 8 years ago, we almost lost our high schools because it simply got too inconvenient for them. So we sat down with them. We have this wonderful partnership. We're working with 2 different school systems, but we sat down with the administrators and we said, what can we do to make it work? It had to be convenient for them. We had to bring it to the high schools. And we let them choose what students. Are you going to bring all your English classes for a Shakespeare performance? Are you going to bring all your history classes for a show about World War II? We let them decide. And now I work with the assistant principals at each high school. As a matter of fact, right now, they're signing up via Google Docs so that we don't have to schedule one more meeting to create this schedule. They're signing up right now. They will finish next Friday. They're giving me 3 choices of the times and the dates that will work for them when this artist is going to be in Cabarrus County for a week. And I'm going to create the master schedule and then go back to them, and they're going to say, oh, I'm going to send all of my students, as many as can fit, into our auditorium, or guess what, gymnasium, but we're going to have students at that performance. And it's creating that partnership and being willing to work with the administrators to make it work. It's a success.
It's fantastic.
Good one. Yeah.
Hi, I'm an artist, and I just want to speak, I want to add to what both of you all have just been talking about and dig a little deeper underneath that, which is residencies that I do with at-risk youth and other young people, not necessarily connected with a school, where the students, I facilitate their creation of an original piece, an original performance that is about what they choose. It's about something that's important to them. They create the performance and then they perform it. And I often do this with at-risk youth who hate to write, and at the end of the residency, they're just writing. They're just writing. And it really, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's transformative for a young person to recognize the artist inside of him or herself. And if they recognize that, then they recognize the art outside of themselves. And I think they can become future generations of audiences for everyone.
Before we move on from arts education, because there's a world of other things that I know some of you want to ask about, but one organization that I worked with, we came up with a program which is very cool. And this was, we said, okay, we'll get an underwriter. We literally will get an individual to make an extraordinary gift, and this gift will be used to underwrite free tickets for high school students. And we figured, okay, if we can give them a free ticket, and it's cheaper than going to a movie, we can get some of them to come to the theater. But the deal was made like this. In exchange for the free ticket, after they come, they have to get online, they have to email us, or blog with us, or whatever, and let them know about their experience. What they felt, what they observed, what they learned, and so forth. And then we thanked them by doing that and invited them to return to us again. And the whole notion of this program was that you get a lot of funders who say, well, how do you know that if you give kids arts today that they're going to be more creative human beings tomorrow and they're going to help change the world, never mind, go into the arts and become artists. And we figured, well, okay, this is going to be a long-term experiment, but if we can stay the course with this for 10 years, 20 years, a couple of decades, at some point we will continue to have relationships with these young people, and they will be saying, what I'm doing today is, I just discovered the cure for this, and what I'm doing that, and it's because I learned about creativity and critical thinking and all of the art, and it brought the creative side of me out. So it was a long-term experiment, but I will tell you that there were funders that were very intrigued by it. Foundations then were also intrigued by the notion and said, so you actually are really going to track this. Because too often what happens in arts education, we've all done this, a foundation wants to fund that because that's a fundable kind of thing, it's a noble thing to fund. We quickly put something together, we do it, and then we're done, and then we get busy because it's a tough time for our budget and we got to move on to other things and we don't have time to stay it. So I think part of it is, you put a program in place and you just stay the course and you just break through, and it's, it's a slow but sure kind of thing. But anyway, anything else on arts education before we, yeah?
You probably anyway, two things. Oh, yes. Two things that I found, is it on? Okay, that has helped presenters who do a combination of residency and then end up with a full performance in their large theater. In addition to going into the schools, which, by the way, Sarah does a fabulous job of organizing. Most of the time when we have a lot of school shows and an ending performance somewhere, maybe you're lucky if you get the artist all the specifics of exactly who they contact with each school and the routing and where all the schools are. Maybe you're lucky 2-3 weeks ahead because schools are difficult to get answers from. Sarah had it, 6 months ahead of time? So kudos to you. But anyway, the other two things that have seemed to help, particularly in the Midwest and West, and certainly could in the South, or maybe you already do it, Boys and Girls Clubs have been a very popular thing to add to the schools. And then, believe it or not, prisons and detention centers, particularly for our one group, Soul Street Dance, who's real good with at risk, has really boosted interest, and the kids hear from them later, and the sponsors increase their audiences for the evening performance. So those two sources are something that I hadn't heard about till relatively recently that were very successful for presenters.
Yeah, the prison, it's an interesting, this notion of working and doing art in prisons. Recently I spoke with a board about Shakespeare Festival that was about to celebrate their 25th anniversary, and they were in a relatively suburban location, and they're good, but they're a little under the radar. They're in a hugely competitive, metropolis kind of market, and I have to say that for the entire 25 years, and I've been in that, I know that area, I was never aware that they were literally going into prisons and working with prisoners and creating Shakespeare productions that they were doing in the prisons. And when we learned that, we sort of thought, if we don't know this, the rest of the world doesn't know this. And as much as you would love to perhaps be known for presenting Shakespeare outside, and that's what you do, this other piece of what you do could become what defines your company. So sometimes I think we just have to adjust our mission a little bit and become extraordinary at something that we are not really focused on. Yeah.
Is
it okay to change directions just a little bit?
Anything, anyone, anytime.
I wanted to get back
And
to...
if anyone needs to like stand up or walk to the back of the room or come over here and say, Greg, could you be quiet and not talk so much, feel free, okay? So.
I wanted to get back to what you were saying about creating community and creating spaces, and also maybe challenge us a little bit, because it's what I do. But to the idea, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking that we all think that young people are different today. Young people are different, they don't want to come to our shows, they don't want to do this. And in fact, I was thinking about myself in the 1970s and going to clubs and rock shows, and I didn't want to sit in a theater either. So maybe one of the things we need to assume is that kids really aren't so different today. What it is that we want to try to fit them into a format that they're just not really interested in participating in. I think the idea of how could we create those community spaces by acknowledging and accepting, and I've always felt this way in how I raise my kids, who they are and where they are at that time, and embracing that, and then creating the community and spaces that make them want to come in. And also, just further, that it's okay that we weave in and out of those places in our lives, because now I don't go to too many rock shows and stand-up clubs and I would much prefer a nice theater, and that's okay. So I'm intrigued by what you're saying about the idea of that, but also that I think we need to just say, hey, they're not really so different, and whatever it is that we need to do to engage them.
Yeah, it reminds me of a company that decided to do what you were saying. It's like, let's not make them conform to our way, let's conform to theirs. And we started creating specific performances where they could tweet during the performance. And they literally sat there throughout most of the performance and tweeted during it. It was interesting that after a while, you kind of saw them, sort of slow down with the tweeting, and then somebody would say, hey, come on, you're not tweeting, But that was, to me, sort of an interesting example. It wasn't my first choice of, how to sort of adjust to their ways. But a lot of people would say, listen, who says that in the symphony you should tell them not to clap between the movements? Or, who says that you can't have a glass of wine in a non-spillable, green, disposable, non-audio cup, So and that was, you laughed, but that was one of the challenges. So I decided that, I think Marissa's probably heard me do this sometimes, and of course, now there's a huge bagel company, and what about ice cream in the winter? No one will like ice cream in the winter. Come on, we'd love ice cream for Vermont. Ben & Jerry's grows up and becomes the biggest ice cream place around. So one of the ideas I had was, somebody needs to manufacture what I just described. It's like a sippy cup, right? Because in your theater, if you've got upholstery or something, you don't want spills, and the artists don't want to hear anything. They don't want to hear the clinking of it or anything. So if somebody could, literally, and I'm telling you, somebody's going to do this. 5 years from now, you say, I remember that guy who said he should invent this cup. So if you want to have a side business and actually become a wealthy millionaire and then be able to invest in arts. Oh, there is one now? Oh. Oh, really? Okay, we'll see. Yeah. I was 3 years ago when I had the idea, I was maybe a moment before my time, but obviously that ship has passed. So, yes.
Kind of tagging on to this idea, and I feel like what we're sort of talking about is creating stakeholders and trying to find ways that people find ownership in what we do. And kind of relating it back to the young audiences all of us want so much. I like the ambassador idea. I know youth councils and things like that have been batted around, but wondering if you had different examples from people that you've worked with around the country who have involved young people in either the production aspect of it. Marketing's great, but actually just helping them understand what goes into producing these programs may create a stakeholder and kind of carry that forward. So just wondering if you guys have any of those examples.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point that I think a lot of people forget about. Here you have this great art form and you're producing it, you want people to see it, but the actual taking part in it sort of goes by the wayside. We started a program at Berkeley Symphony called Under Construction, where we bring in students to actually compose, rehearse, and perform pieces with the symphony. And it's really taken off because there's all these people who, maybe they don't know how to actually write music, but they have these ideas of things that they like the sound of. And for them to have the opportunity to work with a live orchestra and the conductor to rehearse their piece, to talk about sounds and sort of what they want to do with it, and then to really be composing their own work of art has just inspired and excited so many people in our community now. They all think, people young and old are coming to these performances that we now have of these young people who have done these compositions. They say, hey, I want to do that. They want to be involved with the process. So I think if there are opportunities for people to have their hands directly in the performance, whether it's, you could just sit backstage, which is always exciting, and watch things happen, but if you can be involved in some way, whether it's getting someone to be an extra in the theater, which is exciting. I have a friend who stands in on stage in the opera, and just actually be a part of that art form. I think if you have that sort of opportunity, that is something that is equally as exciting, if not maybe more exciting, than having this, a cool reception or some sort of themed evening to actually engage with the arts. And it sort of gives you a whole new perspective too about what goes into that art form and what you're seeing and hearing. So that's
Do many of you use interns, high school, college interns, to literally come in and work in all of your various departments? Not too many. That's something that I think is really a few more, excellent to do, because I know some schools, particularly high schools, where they found that the latter part of your senior year, the students are totally disengaged. They're into college, their grades don't count, whatever. And they've actually said you can take your last 7 weeks to do an internship. And we've had lots of students who have said, I'd like to work in the theater. What area do I want to work in? Well, I love marketing, web design. Great, go to the marketing team. Or, I'd like to work backstage, do tech. Or I'd love to, work with the lighting people. And these have been great. They're huge win-wins because you get these, bright, young, inspired people to come help you. Summer internships the same. College students, some need obviously paid internships, but there are others who just, if they're on a certain track, would like to do a combination of, work at the local restaurant to make money in the evening, and during the day, work with your development department, helping to write grants or whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of opportunity there and a lot of demand for that if you start to put that out into, particularly your high schools and some of your college students, both summer internships, even internships, during the season. Because I think we all agree, all of us know that if we can get them literally working in our organizations, be it behind stage, on stage, off stage, yeah, you get the bug. This is one of those things, what's interesting about this? If tomorrow you decided to go to work for Salesforce, cool company, very cool software, good contact management, you could probably sort of get excited about it and think, oh, this is great, and this is interesting. But it's not the same. You don't get addicted to it. And I think what we've learned is that if we send people into performances, they get addicted, which is why you're all sitting here. If at some point in your life you weren't introduced and then you didn't become addicted, you wouldn't be sitting here. Also, just a semi-aside, I think that once we get them addicted, we got to figure out what to do with them. And I think that's, again, the challenge that we alluded to earlier. It's like, okay, great, now you're addicted. Now you're going to let them go off and do something else. How do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them addicted? And part of that is this whole new thinking about, which we alluded to earlier, move them into our organizations, then move them up fast. And this afternoon we'll talk about, so what exactly does that mean? And how can you raise more money than you ever even imagined and suddenly transform your organization and take it to a place where you have more staff than you know what to do with, if that's what you want, or more artists on your stage than you know what to do with. So anyway, off the subject. Other questions? Yes?
I was just you sort of started what I was going to say, which is about the internships, and I think I work here at the university, and I would say the college students are really a huge population in the sense that a lot of them are required to now have internships to graduate. It's a huge push from a lot of the universities and nationally is that they want, the grades are great and their academics are fine, but they're really looking for those extra opportunities, and that's what's going to make them rise above. So if you've got local colleges or universities around you, and most of you probably do have something, if you can connect to their career services office, they're always looking for that employer relations. And so Enterprise is always going to show up with a table at their job fairs, but the students who want to work in these fields constantly are complaining that there's not opportunities. And so, talk about meeting where you're at. The career services will do all the work for you once you can get on and work with them and have you set up. They can also do it for academic credit, so you might not be paying them, but you're helping them because they're getting the academic credit they need to graduate, but they're also going back and saying, this is where my internship is, talking to their professors and building that relationship. So I would say it's definitely, especially in these summer months when it's a little quieter, use that opportunity to build that relationship with that career services office, because I know for us it's been really beneficial, for Dillian it's been really beneficial, and I see our students constantly wanting that and needing it, and then going and getting jobs because they have the experience that their peers who maybe were in a theater production don't have because they didn't actually put the production on, or they don't know how the box office works. So definitely invest in the college students with the internships. It's really worth your time for sure.
Does your career counseling center, whatever you call it, do they work with your alumni department at all?
They actually do, absolutely. And our career services is very unique in the fact that they continue to provide alumni services for alumni. So they're coming back and providing those resources as well. So they work a lot with our alumni and having those alumni boards and some of that.
Something that I'm aware of now is that in addition to colleges and universities that have alumni departments, independent high schools all over North America have alumni departments, and the future, it appears, for alumni departments will be this professional development, because no longer do alumni departments need to help you find your former classmates, because you can do that yourselves on Facebook. In the old days, that was actually their function, you know. But so now it's like, yeah, whatever, I don't need them for that. But now a lot of young people coming out of school are saying, I could use a job. It's a difficult job market. So I'm betting that we will see those two, career counseling, career services, and alumni services, blend together. And it's just a resource for all of you, because you've got both of those departments at universities and even private high schools. And they're just, ripe with young people ready to get in your theaters. Others? Not a single question. There's one. Oh, I thought that was somebody with a hand up. No? Okay. Oh yeah, there is. Okay.
Sorry, I had to step out to deal with my 17-year-old for a few minutes, so I so I hope that it's not a repeat question. But I was curious about sort of the social aspect, and we discussed creating a social opportunity and environment for college students, and then we sort of said, but those of us who are about to push the folks out of the nest, maybe we're okay with just coming to the theater. And I disagree. For myself, as having had a recent sort of big birthday and about to be an empty nester, I'm also looking for a social opportunity in addition to my performing arts opportunity. And I'm curious to hear if people are doing anything for the 50+ set in that area too, because I like the performing arts, but going and just sitting in a dark theater and listening to an artist isn't always the experience that I would like to have. I'd like to also have a bigger experience, like the kinds of experience you're talking about for the younger people. But so I'm curious about that, your experience with that, other folks' experiences with that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from any of you on what you're doing for that group of people. And I'm curious if any of you are doing singles events and kind of focusing on that. You know that we, of course, have more single people of advanced ages than any time in the history of the world, and the prediction is that there will be more and more of that going forward, in addition to people who will be living longer. So is anybody doing any of that for those whose kids go off and who are single or couples still? Yeah.
This is kind of unconventional, but we have a volunteer usher corps, and they're 80 to 100 people strong, and they, over the years, have developed into this huge resource for us. And they start in their early 50s and go up to their 70s probably. Some are retirees, but a lot of them are people who just want to meet other people. They zone into the organization when they first move to town or when they retire there, when they need something to do, they've gotten a recent divorce or something like that. And we turn to them for so much now, so much more than just ushering. They're volunteers for other events, they've become donors. A lot of them have brought in other people, not just as ushers, but other people as patrons and as donors. So I think that's, although we don't do a specific social event for those people, this usher corps has become its own social and a volunteer workforce.
And celebrate?
We do. They are required, but most of them actually love it. They're required to come to 2 huge meetings every year, and then we've started doing an usher appreciation meeting for them as well, where we just had one, brought them in, gave them pizza and beer, and they thought it was the best thing ever.
They love that, don't they? Yeah, I've done those.
Yep.
Is there an effort on your part, or have you used the usher group almost in an advisory council kind of capacity? I mean, have you asked their input on theater policy and programming, or has anybody done that with their in-house volunteer group?
We have done that as part of our training sessions. The beginning of the year is a training session, and we have asked them, we've done very focused customer service sessions, where we've asked them what we need to do. And we're now moving in a direction, we're starting to talk about looking at these people as board members and council committee members.
Hear from them, right?
We use a lot of their feedback. We just did a recent theater upgrade construction project, and we used a lot of their feedback to make the theater more usable, which, things that we didn't necessarily notice, but they did because they were on the ground floor with the patrons and they heard a lot more than we heard.
Ray, how many did you say you have?
We have between 80 to 100. It fluctuates, and some of them have been there, oh gosh, probably longer than I have. Some of them have been there for 15 years.
And most 50 to 70 are in that range?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do have some young people, but mostly adults.
Will you yell out, those of you that have venues, just yell out, how many ushers? 125? Get a little louder, can't hear you.
15.
Just yell out a number so we can hear. 200, 125,
30.
60, 40? Sharon, how many?
I've already got 125.
No, Sharon, how many?
15.
15, smaller. 20? So the range is from about 15 or 20 to 200. And how many are using, like Ray is, how many are using the ushers in some other capacity? Beginning next week, maybe. Yeah, this ambassador thing, you could do that with your ushers. You can say to your ushers, you can empower them and say, listen, we will give you each 5 tickets, for an example. We want you to bring 5 individuals, different people who you think would be intrigued to come to the theater and might be return visitors. I think you would see, an interesting result from that. Other uses of ushers, or I shouldn't say uses of ushers, but other charges, as Stephen would say, for the ushers?
In the fall, our ushers help distribute our brochures around the county, and prior to shows, they also distribute our posters. We just break it down into the regions because they're from all over the county, and they just come and check in and pick up their allotment of posters. They have a report that they're supposed to do depending on where they leave posters, if the posters are still there, if the owner of the facility decides they don't want them anymore, that kind of thing. So yeah, they're helping us with marketing as well.
I've seen ushers at, I went to an event at Savannah Music Festival, and they had the ushers do a really quick survey. So as you were sitting there, they would come around, and there was maybe 4 or 5 questions, really quick. And I thought it was a really fascinating use of that resource as well.
How many do the most very basic, which is when you've announced your new season and you've got your just very simple, one sheet or something about the season, actually have your ushers hand that out physically instead of inserting in your program as they're standing at the door as people are leaving with a 1 sentence like, this is a fantastic next season, we'll hope you'll join us or something? Anybody using ushers like that? Yeah. Yeah. Companies have found that to be very helpful because, again, that's like a person, handing it to you and paying attention. Other usher, yes?
I just wanted to comment, the family in Hall, we started our usher program in 1990. We have folks who are still with us, who've been there since the beginning.
And it's, I think that's an amazing community statement that they have been part of our family for that long. One comment, and Lauren and Gary, please chime in. I know that you do, we have a usher recognition event, and we have a lot of polling and discussion and feedback requested from them. I think one thing we have to just recognize is one of the things that comes back through our ushers is that we are dealing with increasingly rude audiences and people who are not behaving in the theater in the way that we're accustomed to them. So I put that out to see if anybody else has had similar experiences, and it's kind of a challenge that we face. We talk about, we do want to involve community, we want to reach new people who maybe haven't been in a theater before, but it's a difficult little line to walk, I think, on that issue.
Before we ask the question of how many of you are experiencing rudeness in the audiences, how many of you actually in your curtain speeches or do curtain speeches or even voiceover or something where you address no cell phones, no taping, no photography, opening and unwrapping candies and papers. Does most everybody have a curtain speech that says that? Okay, and then if you've said all that to the people, what kind of rudeness or what kind of unusual behavior, shall we refer to it, are you experiencing sometimes with audiences? All of those? So even though you've told them that, they're still doing all of that.
That was the question that was asked next to me. The things that I would just say that we've also seen is there's an increase in audience noise during the shows. In some cases, it's a positive because they're wanting to interact with the artist, but sometimes that's not the right response and mars the experience for others. Again, a tough area to talk about.
Yeah.
People using their cell phones to read the program.
Like a flashlight?
Yeah, as a flashlight.
Got the flashlight app?
And we even had an experience where we had a gentleman who probably should not have been brought to the theater who had some issues, and he flopped over to the woman next door to him, and she had to get up and leave the theater because there was this man lying on her shoulder. So it's just...
it just occurs to me as you're saying that. I bet, in my entire life of doing curtain speeches and in my entire life of hearing curtain speeches, I can't ever think of a time when somebody said, in addition to all the things I just rolled off, and please, if you have something you'd like to share with the person next to you, save that till after the performance. Does anybody say that or ever heard that? Because that's become a real issue. I was sitting in the theater the other night seeing the premiere of a new American musical, and what I thought was a very upscale, house, and literally the two women behind me continued talking even after the overture. It was like they're singing the first song, and it's like you're still talking, but probably nobody's kind of got through to them that you shouldn't do that.
What did you do?
I did the, unfortunate thing that I wish I hadn't do, which is shh. And that was it. And then one woman said to the other, oh, we shouldn't be talking. I could hear her say that. It was like, oh, okay. It didn't occur to them, right? But people, I think this is the other thing we've experienced, this whole business of being at home. At home, we talk during, we don't, but we hear that others talk during a movie. And some must get up and go get food and put it on pause, So I think that some people who aren't as accustomed to being in the theater kind of don't separate out their behavior. You sit in the theater and you talk during the movie. I have to say, it's like credits in a movie. I mean, how many people here sit and watch the credits at the end of a movie? Yeah. Okay, so can I tell you, you are like, if there's a 99% and a 1%, you are like part of the 1/10 of 1% in the world, I mean, almost everybody else, it's like the movie's over, But you're people in the arts, and you want to know where it was filmed, and who was that, the production, it's just very different. But it's a behavior, it's a behavior.
I was just going to say, like, I'm noticing on Broadway now, when they're doing the curtain speeches, they always become humorous. Unwrap your candy, turn off your cell phone, stop the pacemaker, whatever it may be. If you need to do it, we will reach out the arm of death and we will zap you. You're kidding, that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
And everybody laughs, and then, an usher will come by and stop you. So ushers are getting,
Yeah. Do you use your ushers in that way? So instead of me saying shh, if you hear somebody talking, your ushers can say, don't talk till after the performance? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good use of ushers. I think ushers are comfortable doing that, if they do it discreetly. Yes?
I just wonder if any facility here actually has in their curtain speech saying, if you have any trouble with the performances, our ushers are located here. Please see them, we'll take care of any problems you have. Does anyone do that?
That's good, I like that too. I like that too. And I like this, if you have a thought you want to share during it with your neighbor, wait till afterwards. I'm going to start suggesting that, I like that. Yes?
I think the theater experience as a whole has become a lot more casual than it used to be. People used to dress to go to the theater. It was an event.
Right.
And now it's become so casual in that respect that it's okay to say, hey, did you just see what's going on in the middle of a performance?
Yeah.
And I don't know how we change that other than making it more of an experience.
Yeah.
And you see the older people that come in and the women are dressed, the men are in a suit and tie, or even a jacket, not even a tie, and then you see shorts and flip-flops, and there's no etiquette in going to the theater anymore.
We embraced that. In Portland, we used to think that was a thing that we would brag about. that on any given night you could go to the theater and somebody would be in a jacket and tie and she'd have a beautiful dress, and a couple of seats down there'd be a guy in jeans and somebody else, in a tank top. And we sort of talked about that as a positive, that this is a place that everybody can be comfortable. But people also kind of picked and chose which nights they went. Some people, if it was a Saturday night, you found people dressed a little more. If it was a Tuesday night, not as much. I think this is a real, you bring up a very important challenge in terms of, it has become more casual. What is acceptable? What is the acceptable behavior? How much of their behavior should we modify? And I think that part of it is, it's sort of like, we're in charge here. Do you remember in the early years of email when you all first got online and people that were hunting and pecking and weren't very good with typing would hit all caps? And you get these all caps and people, say, wait a minute, that's like you're yelling at me, It's like, don't do that. Well, until that, the people who were writing emails in all caps, they didn't know that. And I think some of this really is just, if it's okay that they wear jeans or a suit, maybe that's going to just have to be the way it is, though some of us who like to dress up would wish otherwise. But it's not okay to talk during it. And I think we're just going to have to pick and choose our battles, but then really put the behavior, really say what is, so it's like we want you to be comfortable, we want you to be casual, we just don't want anything to, interrupt the performance or something. I don't know.
I may be alone in the room, but I don't want the fear of the wrath of whoever to be in my audience when they come into the theater. I don't want them to be so worried that they are doing the wrong thing, that they have to sit there like a statue and they can't interact with the performance and they can't tell a person next to them that they really liked that dance. That was awesome. Or there's also different levels of cultural audiences that it is perfectly natural for them to shout out during a performance, and that's what they do, and that's how they show appreciation. And for us to say, I'm sorry, that's not the way you should act in the theater. And we're talking about bringing young people into our performances and bringing people who aren't accustomed to the theater. I think we need to give a little bit on that. And I'm not saying that we need to accept behavior that causes other people to not enjoy the performance. But I think that we need to open our minds a lot more and think there are people out there who are going to behave differently than how we would, and sometimes that's okay.
Do you think that we can get to a happy medium where if Sharon doesn't want to hear anybody talking, you'll tell them that it's okay if they whisper in such a low voice that she won't hear them? I guess to me that's that's the trickiest thing. I get what you're saying, that in Europe they just like boo for operas, and it's like people go crazy in different kinds of concerts. I guess the question is, if we can't decide how they're going to dress, and we want to make everyone comfortable, which I totally agree with you. I mean, we need people to be comfortable, or they're not going to want to keep returning. That seems to me the only thing that how does one address this notion of some of us who wish we could just lose ourselves in the performance and see and hear nothing but what's on stage, versus others who want to make commentary on it. How do we do that? I don't know how you do that. Does anyone?
I don't have the answer to that question,
but we need the answer. We're desperate people here.
But I had two thoughts that happened at Wake Forest that may illuminate this subject. And one was a few years ago when the Department of Theater hired these professionals to come in and do a focus group. They were really after why their attendance among these graduates at their theater performances had fallen up. They chose a group of freshmen and then a group of seniors, took them through the same process. And I have always remembered the one student who stood up, and I think it was from the senior group. And he just said, well, I went to the Scale Center to see a theater production, and it was such a controlled environment. And it really struck me that this young man, here he is in college, but he'd never been in an environment that gave him an assigned seat, and they turned the lights down, and they, for him, this was a new experience. So it made me think after that, with the Seacrest Artist Series, for so many students, this is the first time they're ever doing anything like this, and they truly, you don't know what you don't know. That may address some of your concerns.
But then,
But
yeah.
I became increasingly concerned over the years at the behavior of so many of these very bright, very smart young people, and they're bringing in their laptops and sitting there, you know, through a live performance, and it was just very troubling. So I asked my student intern to draw up a Seacrest etiquette and stuck it in all the programs. And I asked her to write it in her...
I don't know, can we do that? Create funny top 10 lists and maybe have them think, we have a sense of humor, but...
I had a comment about etiquette thing and ushers. Up at DPAC, I'm sure you've all heard what during Performing Arts Center, I'm getting hungry.
We'll get you food soon, I promise.
They do it right. It just seems that everything they do is right. And I have to believe the ushers must go to usher school. Because several times when we've attended, different ushers will comment to us, "Oh my, don't you look so nice tonight? Oh, I love what you're wearing," or whatever. It's not just at the door, it's like throughout the whole theater. So I think they're told to compliment people.
Right.
And they say it loud enough so like the people behind you can hear it if they're dressed in their tank tops and the jeans, you know, like. So anyway, I think that's something that wonderful they do with their ushers.
Yeah, they probably get like Nordstrom training courses or something.
I have the solution for all those problems. We create these.
Finally. All right, let's hear it.
We create these giant pods where we don't have to leave our house.
Just fly them all in together and they can just hover next to each other.
When I was younger and my parents used to drop me off to the movie theater, what made it so much fun was the fact that everybody we knew about us was yelling, "Oh, I bet you it's Luke's father, I bet you it's Luke's father." Ah! You know? Now I go to the theater, I can't stand those damn kids doing that. So a part of it is just the age category. Nothing upsets me more than being in a movie theater, because they're all terraced now, and the three people in front of me have their cell phones on the light.
Right.
Visually, it gives me a headache.
Yeah.
Because like we shut those blinds behind you, that really bothers me.
Right.
Thank you, Dave, for doing that.
Right.
But I manage a small symphony in the foothills of the mountains, and we're trying to get the Y generation, the millennials involved. So I have this concept where you come in, you make your curtain speech, and you invite all these people to please turn on all your electronic devices and your iPads. Go to this site, and there's 5 cameras on stage. If you get tired of seeing the symphony live, please pick one of these cameras and view whatever you want to view. And then it becomes interactive. They're not just watching the one picture, they're watching the 4 or 5 that are on their iPad, but don't punch sound through it. And if you have to put these people in the balcony or wherever where the light doesn't bother anyone else.
Right.
I know you manage or work with the symphony. Have you ever heard of any symphony doing that, or has any other performing arts organization ever done that? Of course, there's some technology issues with broadband, and I'm working on that so that it's later. So, anyway, thank you.
It's a very creative idea.
Very unique.
Now see, we have to go back to like my toughest critic. So Ray, how would you feel if we actually had earmarked certain areas for certain kinds of comfort levels? So as he said, the people with the computers would be, you know, over on one side so the light wouldn't bleed. The tweeters would be over here. Those who like to talk a little, make a few comments to talk to their friends would be here. Would that be maybe how would that work?
I think I might have been hurt in the extreme. I definitely don't believe that we should let people in there talking on their cell phones and doing whatever they want in the theater. However, I personally feel that when we bring everyone into the theater, they are our family. We want them to feel like our family. They are our guests. You would not have a dinner party and tell people what to wear, how they should talk, how they should sit.
Oh,
Maybe Stephen. Of course, yeah.
Never been to one of Stephen's dinner parties. You have been instructed very carefully. You will not bring Prosecco, and you will wear this. Yeah, it's interesting challenge. I have to say, this wasn't the challenge I expected that would be the challenge that would come up. Yes.
One way we sort of address that, it seems to have worked so far, is that during the curtain speech, I do say that we have a very strict "do not annoy your neighbor" policy. And then we talk about, the screens are distracting and all these different things, and we are indeed a family. We're all here together, so your family has the responsibility of keeping you in line. So that, it kind of makes it goofy and fun, but at the same time, you're all understanding that there are people around you that are then kind of going back to a stakeholder type of position. You're all there for this experience, so the people around you may tolerate it, but they may not. And they're going to let you know, and I've given them permission to let you know.
Do you use that language, though? That we have been very strict and do not do this?
Yeah.
See, I would think that would be problematic. I would think you want to not do, that sounds
No,
negative
it's
to
in
me.
great humor, and everybody...
Oh, so you're doing it
Yeah.
like it's so tongue-in-cheek. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say you'd want to present it
Because they
in a
hear
very
strict,
positive way.
and then they're expecting whatever the strict is, and they do not annoy your neighbors. Just goofy.
Oh, okay.
I remember one comment Linda Lavin had made when she was living here about her experience, and I forgot what show she was in, but someone on the very front row while the play was going on, and she was there center stage, got a phone, her cell phone rang, and so the lady answered. And it started the conversation while Linda was in her dialogue or whatever on stage, and the lady, no, I'm here at so-and-so, I'm watching the play with Linda Lavin. She's not really very good. The hardest thing she's ever done is to be able just to keep going.
Oh my God.
And not just walk off stage
You know, maybe we could create that video, and when everybody sat down in the seat, you could roll that video before every performance, and maybe you could just sort of let everybody kind of consciously, subconsciously know what is and isn't acceptable, you know? You know, some theaters now what they do is to give people the idea. When you first sit down and the lights go down, suddenly you hear the sounds of cell phones. Cell phones. Maybe we could do the same thing with, just have a series of the cell phone thing, the crinkling thing, then the talking to the neighbor thing, and we just go through a whole series. Now, I know you're not liking that in the back. I'm just trying to find gentle, fun ways to make our family all comfortable, even though they're very different, everyone in our family, right?
Well, and I think going on what William was saying, that it's also where you use your usher corps, again, going back to that face-to-face, person-to-person interaction. And your usher corps has the ability to see if people are sitting in their seats sort of going, who is that, and if people are getting annoyed by something, that's when your usher corps steps in and goes to the person that's making the others around them uncomfortable and says, could you stop? And so I think you use those people to help you police or notice what's going on in your audience and are people being bothered.
Right.
We have a few minutes left.
All right, so we're going to wrap up. One question before we wrap up. Yes?
Well, it's not a question, it's more of another comment, but
Okay.
You can either create a restriction or you can make an opportunity. And restrictions are a bummer, nobody really likes to deal with them, but if you create an opportunity, then it's something fun. And when my kids were growing up, we used to do this thing that we called Dinner with the Queen. And it was, a fancy dinner where we would have all the table settings, and it was all very proper, and it was fun. And I also like to get dressed up. I mean, most of the time I'm in jeans or whatever in my office. So if you create maybe one of the things you could do, I don't know, would be to have certain nights that are like your Dinner with the Queen night at the theater, and everybody gets a chance, an opportunity to dress up and kind of be in this environment in a certain kind of way, if that's something. And maybe conversely, you could have an opportunity that's sort of I don't know what the antithesis of that is actually, but that kind of way of thinking about how to get the audiences to participate.
Well, anyway, I hope that some combination of presentation and conversation was helpful. I hope you've heard some things this morning that you hadn't heard before, that some of what we've all been talking about gives you a little bit more opportunity to be a little more successful in what you're doing. And that segue about comfort and family is really kind of a good one, because when we adjourn, when we reconvene after lunch, we're really going to get into this notion about family and how to develop the family and the community and make them family so that they do things for extraordinary ways that really have a huge impact on what you're doing. And so before we go, I just want to say that if any of this prompts conversations, because you all have, we're aware, very specific different venues and organizations, even though they're alike like us, they're similar also they're dissimilar like us. So we're glad to continue the conversation, over lunch, after lunch, about specific individual things. And then, just so we know, for this afternoon, I sort of asked the group the question, but just so we're clear on exactly who we're talking to, how many of the people in this room personally have the responsibility or personally are involved in the process of raising money from individuals, foundations, or corporations in some way, shape, or form? And of those people who didn't raise their hand, how many of you then have staff who work with you or for you that have that responsibility? And the others who didn't raise your hand, what does that tell us? Or what? There's no fundraising involved?
University.
University? Agent. Town? Municipality? No, not so much. Still raising. Okay. So the exceptions would be perhaps a university presenter, where advancement does it or someone does it at the university level, and obviously agents and managers. Though I think if I were the Northern Carolina presenters, I would suggest that from now on your agent and manager members begin raising money for us. Okay? We'll just add that to the list. Thank you very much. Have a great lunch. We'll come back in a little while.
All right, really quickly, to get to our next venue, we're done with this room. And so actually, if you look at your packets, there's the university map, which I imagine most of you used to get here. We'll be going to the yellow circle on the map, and it shows the parking lot, which is parking lot M, and the name of the building is the Fisher Student Center. And on the reverse, there are two little details that zoom in and then zoom in again on the detail of the map and then on the building. But it's upstairs on the second floor of the Fisher Student Center, and it's called the Clock Tower Lounge. It is this way, that way. So it's kind of that way. But you'll just follow the map. You'll see we're in the red circle right now, and we're moving towards the middle of campus from the rear of campus.
Across from the baseball stadium, if you are across from the baseball stadium, you are in the right parking lot.